Hey everybody, what's going on? Dace here. I trust you're all having a stellar day so far. I'm stoked because it's been some time since we jumped into Merging with the Machine, the series where we get into some of the less explored facets of the shmup journey, like approach and mindset. Today's topic is all about self-imposed limitations and how we can use this to not only accelerate the growth of our skills, but also overcome ourselves by dissolving self-doubt, weakness, and anything else that holds us back from unlocking our true potential. I've witnessed major transformational shifts in my own skills by practicing the things I'm about to share. So if you feel it's time to push yourself deeper because you know you're capable of more, stick around because this short talk might be another piece to your puzzle. With all that out of the way, let's get into this. Before we get into what some self-imposed limitations are and how to practice them, I want to start by saying there's nothing fancy or complex about this process, but it is far more demanding than many people will be comfortable with initially, and to be honest, that's the whole point. This is about leaving our comfort zone. Unlike some videos where I cover a great deal of information, this episode will be much more of a nutshell by comparison, because it's more about touching on a few things, sharing an example or two, and then letting you experiment with the ideas as you see fit. Furthermore, I'm not saying you won't grow as a player if you don't do these things, but I feel there is a particular potency in practicing self-imposed limitations because it allows our skills to branch out in much less common directions and requires that we start operating beyond our current average skill level. So what are some examples of self-imposed limitations in shmups? Things like not using bombs, not allowing yourself to take hits, enter hyper modes, or even attack enemies. Let's briefly look at each of these limitations and what they can teach us. I always encourage people to experiment without using bombs because when we encounter a situation knowing we can't use them, our mind needs to problem solve in a completely different way than we're used to. If doing this, your skills and awareness of what's possible grow in ways you might not even realize until you experience it yourself. Playing without bombs is also a fantastic way to build confidence. When you confront attacks head-on instead of throwing a bomb to avoid dealing with the problem, you're training yourself to be far more resourceful and reduce what you perceive to be a threat, which is a potent step toward becoming a stronger player. After some practice, difficult sections you would normally throw a bomb at out of panic or uncertainty will be much more familiar to you. Ultimately, these moments will no longer be worth using a bomb for, meaning you have additional resources later on when things are far more intense during your actual runs. Next, let's look at hyper modes. A hyper mode will almost always increase our damage output. So in a situation where we aren't doing extra damage because we're not triggering such a mode, what does that mean for us? If it's a boss fight, you'll likely be in the battle for a longer period. This brings up a few problems we need to solve, such as how to survive for longer, how to maneuver through complex attack patterns we would normally avoid either by getting a bullet cancel when we trigger the hyper mode, or because our projectiles while in that enhanced state cancel enemy fire. Additionally, if you usually clean up before the boss reaches a particularly difficult phase, you'll now need to learn how to manage those unfamiliar attacks. If, on the other hand, it's any given part of the run outside of boss battles, then the problems may be the same as in boss fights or slightly different. For example, if you typically rely on a hyper mode to clean up a deadly enemy-filled section in a matter of seconds, you now need to think about how to efficiently and safely tackle that entire part of the run. In a normal situation, you might be able to drop a bomb or trigger a hyper mode from any place on the screen, but now you need to know the most advantageous position to start attacking from, where it's safe to move to and at what pace, what enemies you need to target first, what attacks are easy to dodge, which ones require more of your attention, etc. Suddenly there's a lot more on our plate, and at first it may feel like a complete mess, but the more your brain starts practicing this, the better you'll become at reading the screen, prioritizing actions, and conserving gauge resources, to name a few things. When we explore not firing on enemies, everything boils down to movement, budgeting available space, and learning far more about our enemies than we typically do when destroying them in a standard scenario. Since we know our foes aren't going anywhere until their programming sends them away, we need to push ourselves to develop creative plans to ensure our survival. You may want to simply observe enemy behavior when they are on screen for a longer duration before you even think about tackling a section. You might notice subtle things like ways in which their targeting is limited, the maximum number of times they fire, or some other detail you can use to establish a solid strategy that would otherwise remain outside your awareness. This especially is where dodge theory comes to the forefront. We can do things like lead bullets off screen, keep specific areas free of enemy fire, or gauge whether their attacks allow for something simple like circling their craft until the threat has passed. If you're not familiar with or haven't yet started experimenting with bullet streaming, bullet hurting, etc., this is an ideal time to start. And if it helps, please check out my video on beginner dodge theory, as that's a great first step to exploring some of these things. Depending on the game, not taking a single hit during a stage, let alone the entire run, can be incredibly demanding. But like the other limitations we've covered today, playing this way can teach us a great deal. The idea is simple: do whatever it takes to avoid being hit. This will undoubtedly require you to learn the flow of each stage and memorize more than you would typically. It will demand a far greater grasp on things like enemy and boss attacks, timing regarding your damage output, how long it takes to bring down foes, and how we can use this knowledge to play more intuitively. You'll need to know when to be on the move, when to stay put, what safe spots exist that you can exploit if necessary, how to more accurately gauge threats, and loads of other details and considerations which may only surface when you subject yourself to this type of situation. This experience is expressed in countless ways with how varied factors are from one shmup to the next. And because of this, you can witness some incredible interactions you might never see anywhere else. One of the major takeaways to playing like this is you learn an insane amount of information and eventually know the game like the back of your hand. Having this kind of expanded awareness makes it so that no matter the situation or the fumbles, you know where to be, what to do, and how best to do it without needing to stop and think about it. Before we wrap things up, I want to share my most recent example of how I initially viewed something intimidating and what the actual reality was when putting myself in that situation. As some of you know, I've been digging deep into Gunnail over the last few weeks. When I started thinking about not bombing and not taking hits during the boss fights of stages 2 and 5 and the final boss, those three felt very intimidating. The area their attacks cover and lack of safe spots compared to other bosses had me feeling like putting strategies together for each would take quite some time and be incredibly difficult to pull off consistently. However, after confronting them, I realized that not only were there simple methods for each, but they didn't take more than a few minutes to figure out. I share this example because it's almost as though knowing we can use bombs or hyper modes subconsciously has us feeling more secure. And when thinking about facing an obstacle without that sense of security, we usually feel uncomfortable and will often shy away. I feel like always playing with items and resources at the ready can lead to letting our guard down for extended periods or prevent us from tackling something in the first place because we have this idea about what it will be like, but that idea is often the complete opposite of what the reality is. In ways we will likely play better without bombs, hyper modes, etc. because we know we don't have that safety net or those tools at our disposal. In this situation, we are 100% aware we have nothing to rely on except for our raw skills. This means we need to pay closer attention, process information faster, and execute actions far more efficiently. And in my experience, the mind and body will pick up the pace when needed. You may not notice this overnight because, like anything, it takes time and practice, but speaking from what I have observed personally, you will eventually realize your own leaps and bounds. In conclusion, whether you choose to explore one limitation or multiple simultaneously, this approach is not about chaining ourselves down and forcing every game to be played in this way from here on out. It's about putting ourselves in situations that will initially feel uncomfortable and intimidating, but which reward us in ways we can hardly fathom at the start. By facing these challenges and overcoming ourselves, we grow stronger, learn greater balance, and become incredibly versatile. In my experience, practicing with self-imposed limitations is a significant way to strengthen our patience and determination, and it grants us the opportunity to reveal what we're truly capable of when we apply ourselves. Anyway, there's a ton more to this topic, but that's where I'm leaving things off for today. This approach won't be for everyone, but if you've been inspired to buckle down to challenge yourself with some of these ideas, that's awesome, and I'd love to hear how things go for you and what you learn. If you enjoyed this talk, please consider liking the video and subscribe to keep your days STG infused. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.